Today I am going to be doing a demonstration with Winsor and Newton Pigment Markers. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. Today I'm going to be doing a demonstration with Winsor and Newton Pigment Markers. And just for transparency, some of these pigment markers were provided to me by Winsor and Newton several months ago in order to review, and I liked them so much I went out and purchased a whole lot more of them. So some of these were given to me, but most of them I purchased myself. I'm working on Yupo paper today. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where the 1-hour version of this tutorial is available for you now, complete with real-time clips and voiceover. Now let's move on to this tutorial. One of the first things you need to keep in mind when you're using the Winsor and Newton pigment marker is that you need to use the right kind of paper. Regular marker paper is not going to blend like this. I'm working on Yupo paper, which is a very heavyweight paper and is my absolute favorite with these. Winsor and Newton make their pigment marker paper, but it's too thin. I want to say it's about 20 pounds. It's almost like tissue paper. I don't like working on paper that thin, but the Yupo works perfect for these. So either way, just make sure you're using the right kind of paper with these, because regular marker paper, you're not going to get them to blend like I am here. So what I'm doing is laying down the color, and then I'm using my finger to smudge it out. With these, when one area starts to dry, you can reactivate that area by either putting another color over it. You can use the colorless blender or the white blender, or even a little bit of water will help to reactivate the previous layer. So you can keep layering and layering all you want and reblending any area that you want. And you can get really smooth results this way. Mixing in some browns and greens here. And these colors I love because you can blend so many together and make completely new colors. So even if you've only got a handful of colors, let's say you got the 12 set, you're still going to be able to do a lot with those and mix a lot of colors with what you have. Adding an even darker brown into this. These are really forgiving. If you have something happen like I did in here where I realized, you know what, I don't like the results I'm getting, you can wipe it off with a wet paper towel and try again. It will have stained the paper. The paper is not going to go back up to completely white, but you are able to correct a lot of different things. So if you realized, wow, I forgot that I wanted a tree branch there and I've already colored it in, no big deal. You can just wipe that area off. Mixing more colors in here. My goal here was just to get the main background colored first. This is a very, very fast medium to work in. It's kind of a nice break, especially for those who are used to working in colored pencil where it's just such a slow medium here. You can cover a lot of area very quickly. Darkening up some of these edges. And as one area starts to dry, I can add another color on top and it just keeps adding more and more pigment. So if it's not dark enough the first layer, it's not a big deal. I'll let it dry a little bit, put more marker over it. And now putting more marker over it, it's not the same as, let's say, colored pencil or Inktense where it will just glaze over it. This will reactivate the previous color, but I'm depositing more pigment onto the paper, so when I blend them all together, I end up with almost a thicker mixture of the pigment on the paper. So I get a much deeper, richer color by adding color on top of a dry area and then reblending it out. Using the white blender here. Now the white blender, it's not an opaque white. You might think that you're going to be able to get, let's say, white whiskers with this marker. You're really not. It's more for blending. It slightly lightens the area, but not that much. It's not opaque at all. Blending more colors into that. Now this tool that you're seeing me use is actually a makeup brush. It's by e.l.f. I picked it up at Old Navy one day when it was up at the front register, and it's just a really soft brush. I thought, hey, this might work for the pigment markers, and it did. It works really well. So you can blend with different soft brushes, you can blend with your fingers, or you can blend with the markers themselves. As you can see, for the most part, I like blending with my fingers the best. I really like the results that that gives. And if it starts to get too rough, again, it's not a big deal. I'm just going to reactivate it with more color. I decided to lighten some of this up. So I'm taking a paper towel and wiping a little bit of that off with water and then adding the red back in and the brown. I wasn't thrilled with the results I was getting. Not a big deal. I can wipe some off and do it again. I'm doing the same thing here. I'm using the paper towel to start blending and smudging things out. There's barely any water on that paper towel. I mean, it's almost completely dry, just a slight amount of moisture on it, and that is blending pretty well. So areas that have started to dry and I'm getting these harsh lines, I'm able to use that paper towel that has almost no water on it and use that to smudge out. You want to experiment. There's just so many different ways to get so many different looks here. And that paper towel that I'm using is a Viva paper towel. So it would be kind of the same as using an old t-shirt. If you don't have access to Viva paper towels, I would recommend an old t-shirt, not a regular like Bounty paper towel. Isn't going to be the same. Those are too rough. You want to use something that's fairly cloth-like. And even again, if at this point I decided I wanted completely different colors, it wouldn't really matter. I could wipe this off with a bit of water and do it again. I started adding my circles at this point and realized, oh, that's not going to stand out enough. I need to darken some of this up some more. So I took this really dark green and went over with a little bit of black and more of the red so that when I come back through with the circles, they'll stand out a lot better than what they would have here. And there's that paper towel again. It's almost dry. Not quite, but almost. I had to experiment a little. See this one here, I added a little bit more water and I'm able to lift more of that color off where I want it to be lighter behind the frog's head. Now I'm using the Q-tips. One end has water, one end is dry. So the end with the water, I initially wipe off the pigment marker from the paper, create my circle, and then I use the back end that is dry to get rid of that little circle that ends up, that little dot of pigment that ends up in the inside from the water. I love the look this gets with these markers. This is probably one of my favorite techniques from everything I've tried with these markers. This one is one of my favorite things that they can do. It's just such an easy way to get this look. Much easier than most of the other mediums that I work in, maybe with the exception of airbrushing. My frog is drawn out with a regular 4H pencil. And most of that blends out once I start putting the marker on. You won't really see much with the pencil through this. There's that little dot I was talking about on the inside of those circles where I just use the back end of the Q-tip to clean those up. Now I want to make sure when I do circles like this that I've got lots of different sizes and that they overlap. If they're not overlapping and if they're all the same size, if either of those things are happening, you just look like you have a bunch of polka dots. Which is fine. This is actually an easy medium to get polka dots in if that's what you want. But here, by overlapping them, it'll give me a better look. Kind of creating clumps and clusters of dots. Another really great thing about creating a background like this is that if you did not get your background blended out perfectly, it's not a big deal. You're going to be able to hide it with dots. If an area looks too rough, put a dot there. It's really easy to see now why it was important for me to get the background dark enough. If it wasn't dark enough, these little dots wouldn't really stand out so much. So that's why I ended up going back through it. Now this area, I need to be a little bit more smooth. This is part of the tree bark. You can see I'm just working the pencil in the way that, or the marker, and the way that I'm blending it is in the direction that the tree bark goes. It's not in focus, so I don't want a lot of detail. I just want the hint of tree bark there. Now for this area of the tree that the frog is sitting on, I loved this. This, I was just intentionally messy. I let all of my marker strokes show, and I got this really cool texture. It looks like tree bark. It has the roughness that I wanted, and really all I'm doing is scribbling little marker strokes and overlapping those marker strokes to build up what I needed. I got a little bit too dark on some of these areas, so I took a paper towel with a little bit of water and lightened them up. But that's all it was scribbling. There's no, like, it looks like it's detailed. It really wasn't. Now, this area of the frog's face, this was part of our live stream. I'll have a card pop up so you can check that out and watch that in real time if you want. So we're going to move through this portion really quickly so that I can slow it down a bit when we get to the frog's body. But this is the same thing. I'm just layering and layering until I get the colors the way I want. And generally, I'm going to start on the lighter side, get my lighter colors blocked in first, and then go on top of that with my darker colors. And these markers have two tips. You've got a thicker chiseled edge on one end and then another tip for finer points. I thought that I would use my colored pencils a lot more to clean up details, get details around the eyes and the toes. Really, the markers worked better for me than the colored pencil did on this paper. This paper is so smooth. The only real use I found for using the colored pencil with it is tinting color. And you'll see that a little bit later on. The colored pencil, the luminance especially, worked great for that. I tried my other colored pencils, the Polychromos, the Prismacolor. They didn't stick real well. I didn't like the results I got. The luminance definitely were the best. The markers work really well for the details, much more so than I was anticipating for this. I was thinking I'd use the colored pencil as almost a crutch to fix things that I didn't do well with the marker, but it wasn't needed that much. I ended up just using it to tint some of the color. You can see using the finer point there. And what I've done on a lot of these areas, it's not just solid green, solid brown. I'm blending colors and going around the edges and doing a lot of shading. These work very similar to paint in the way that you can blend and shade colors. And even if an area is dry, I can have the brown on there and decide, you know what, I need it to be a little bit lighter. I can lift some of the color to lighten up the inside of like the brown spot that's on the forearm of that frog. I lifted some of that color to lighten it up and then went around the edges with a darker color, and even though portions of that were dry, it still blended in and reactivated the previous color, so I was able to get really nice blending with these. And that's got to be one of my favorite parts about these markers. One, they blend so well even if they're dry. The second is that they're light fast, and that's not something that most markers can make the claim of. These are the only light fast markers, so you're safe to sell your work with these. They are not going to fade on anyone who buys the work, which is a problem with a lot of the other markers. Now I'll come back through and deepen up the shadow underneath the frog. As long as I'm not taking that marker and working it back and forth again and again over a previously filled in area, it's not going to really lift the marker. I'm going to have to add a lot of pigment to get it to lift the previous color, so I can actually just darken an area I already have by just quickly adding a couple of pencil strokes or brush marker strokes, I guess we'll call that, marker strokes over the color underneath. So it doesn't always lift that color is my point there. Just depends on how you work the marker, so you'll want to experiment with them. Adding a little bit more green into some of this, and there was an area where I decided, you know what, I need it to be lighter, and any color would have worked there. I used a light green on the arm and then stuck my finger in it to lift some color, and I'm going to do that a lot for the dots later on. Here I'm reblending out the back a little bit. So there I'm using the white blender, and it's not really adding white. What I'm doing is reactivating the color underneath and then sticking my finger on it, which pulls that pigment off the paper. And that's how I'm getting these tiny highlights and these little dots. If I use the marker by itself, it's not really going to leave much in the way of dots. It's just not, it's too translucent. So here though, I can just add the little dots I want, stick my finger on it, and it pulls off that highlight. Using that Q-tip with some water to pull up some dots on the frog's back. Needed to lighten that up a lot. You can create so many different textures with these just by changing the tools that you use. Q-tips are on my must-have supply list for these markers. Q-tips, and I also keep a little water well next to me as I work so that I can dip the Q-tip in it, I can clean it off and keep reusing the same Q-tip. The first few times I worked with these, every time the Q-tip would get dirty, I would change it for a clean one, and I was going through Q-tips way too fast. You can actually just rinse it off and keep reusing the same one. More of those little dots. You see, every time I'm sticking my finger on it to pull the pigment off, and I end up with pigment all over my fingers. These just rinse off with water. They're really easy to clean. And as you can see, this always you're able to lift off previous colors, so any finished artwork should be framed. Make sure if you sell this to somebody that they know, put it behind glass. I'm not sure if any fixatives would work well on this or different types of varnishes, but if it's behind glass, you're safe enough. Using a little bit of blue mixed in with my black there to create some depth. Notice on that eye, it's not just straight black. I left a lot of gray and white highlights on there. Now here's where I came through with a colored pencil. This is a blue pencil that I'm using with luminance, and I'm tinting the color, the shadow underneath the frog. And that is something, if I tried to do with the markers, would have been a lot harder to get this smooth of a look on top of color that I already had down. But it's really easy just to go over and tint the color like this with the pencils. And I did this a little bit on the background as well, over some of the previous dots that I had drawn. I went over it with some green just to tint those colors. You just want to make sure that the marker is 100% dry, like not just dry to the touch. Give it another 20 minutes on top of that before you go on top of the colored pencil. The colored pencil can kind of smudge and lift it if it's not all the way dry. Taking a little bit of violet and layering that over some of the browns. The white colored pencil I was hoping would add highlights. It doesn't show up very well at all. I was better off using or lifting some of the marker and letting the white of the paper show through for my highlights. That definitely showed up the best. And here's where I was talking about before, where I'm able to darken areas up. I'm adding the shadows on top of previous colors, and it still sticks, it still shows up well, and it's not reactivating what's underneath and that much because I'm not reworking the same area again and again. I'm just quickly going over it, so I haven't hit a point where that's lifting the previous color from the bark under the tree, or under the frog. Words, they're hard. More shadows there. Some little details. I'm using my sepia marker here. This is a very dark brown, and a lot of this for the details I just add dots. It creates a really nice texture. These are so highly pigmented, so every single stroke that you make, every dot, it shows up really well. Except the white. And there's where I went over the background a little bit with some green, darkened up that bark a little bit. And that is it for this guy. Again, if you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where you've got your 1-hour version of this tutorial and the reference photo. This one is available for you guys there. This was one of our monthly Patreon reference photos. Baby Shoulder Chicken comes to say hi to everybody. Would you hurry up and molt? You're growing new flight feathers, but still no tail. You have no tail. Although, when you finally grow your tail back, you're not going to look so much like a chicken. Have you subscribed yet? If not, there's a handy button right there. It's round orange arrow. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all 5 of my new art videos every single week. And a shoulder chicken. I'll see you guys tomorrow.